Hi, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Speakers, and I'm here today chatting with the podcaster, leadership speaker and executive performance coach, Dr. Gary Crotaz. Have I said your name correctly, Gary?
You have.
Brilliant. Well, great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
And I'm really looking forward to finding out more about you. So before we get into the speaking side of things, it's always good to find out a little bit about your background. So tell me, because I believe yours is quite interesting and varied, to say the least.
It is. I've done a few things along the way. I originally trained as a medical doctor, did a PhD in a molecular biology lab. And in my late 20s, realized that I didn't want to pursue a career in medicine. And I moved into consulting first for about 10 years, and then into retail leadership, first with Mothercare and then with Selfridges Group. I actually started working at Selfridges in February 2020, so just before the pandemic kicked off. So that was a very interesting time actually to be working in the retail space, very challenging time. And I came out of retail in the pandemic, and I thought, if I was coaching myself, what would I say? Do the thing you love. And the thing I love is growing and developing people. And that's when I started to build my coaching and my speaking and my writing in the field of performance coaching.
So natural progression, that sounds like we need to dig a little deeper. Give me an idea about the typical type of work that you're involved with these days, the type of coaching work that led to this, really.
So I've always been fascinated in particular by peak performance and world-class performance. And along the way, alongside my executive corporate career, I was also a professional ballroom dancer. So my wife and I trained and traveled around the world. We represented the UK 7 times in world and European championships. So there's a part of that. There's definitely a part of that that comes through in the coaching that I do, the speaking that I do. I'm really interested in helping people to think. There's loads of people helping you to fix your faults. And I want to be somebody who's helping to inspire you to achieve extraordinary goals. So I work with senior leaders. I work with entrepreneurs. I actually work with quite a few actors and performers in the US, in the UK, and in Europe, helping individuals and teams to really achieve their goals. And then I do a lot of work around purpose. And this comes to the unlock moment I know we're going to come on and talk about.
So yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, you must love that. And, you know, you said that you absolutely love it. And I wholeheartedly believe that if you're doing something you love, it doesn't feel like work. So I'm really with you with that. And I teach my kids that every single day, that they should be heading in that direction and doing something they love. But to work with such inspiring, creative people on a daily basis, and then to try to help them, you know, even get better than they are already. That's a winning formula. So last year, you mentioned it briefly, you wrote an award-winning book called The Idea Man's Mindset. Tell me the thinking behind that.
So I've always had a belief that more people should get access to coaching and the coaching mindset. So when I started my coaching career, I sent my coaching clients off to do homework between the sessions. And eventually I thought, hang on, I think the homework itself could become a book. And I thought maybe I can work myself out of a job by creating a book, and people can get access to some of this thinking. The idea mindset is for people who are at points of transition. Maybe it's a transition in their career. They've just taken on a new leadership role for the first time. Maybe they're thinking about a career change. Maybe they're thinking about rebalancing their work and their life. And it's a process of going through and figuring out. So IDEA stands for figuring out your identity and the direction you want to be going in for a future where you're highly engaged and you're living an authentic life in line with your values and your sense of purpose. So that's the idea mindset. And it comes through to this remarkable clarity of who you are and what you think, clarity of how you make decisions about what you want to do next, and clarity of the actions you need to take.
So say that again: identity, direction, be
engagement and authenticity.
Authenticity.
Yeah.
I love authenticity. I think that is truly, once you hit or you become your true authentic self, then you're on a completely different path in life. And I think that's what we should be teaching our children, isn't it? To just go with who they are and not try to be something they're not. I love it. This is speaking to me. I'm liking this, Gary. I need you to coach me. So you've also done a podcast, haven't you? The Unlock Moment. How did that come about? And I understand you've had some quite interesting participants.
Yeah, so I published the book in January 2022, and then 5 weeks later I got bored and I thought I need to do my next thing. And I was thinking about the people that had gone on the idea mindset journey. And for many of them, and I was thinking of one person in particular who became my episode 1 of the podcast, they would have these remarkable moments of clarity. So there was a progression of their understanding of themselves, their values, their strengths, all these kinds of things. And then there would be a point where they would go, I've just figured it out. I've just figured out what's important to me, or I can let that thing go, or I give myself permission to change. And I thought back in my own career, and I thought of times when I'd had those moments. And the unlock moment is not just another sort of emergent moment of clarity as you figure things out. It's the ones where 20 years later you think back and you think, I know where I was, who I was with, what I was thinking at that time. And so many people have then come on the podcast since then. I asked them to talk about their stories of remarkable clarity, and they're very different contexts, very different types of people. But whenever they start the story and say, I was walking down the pavement, I was wearing a hat, I was with my dog, I'm like, this is the one, because it's so vivid in their mind. And when they tune into that, it tells them something about purpose and values, because it's the point sometimes they might have given up a high paid job to pursue their entrepreneurial ambition, or it might have been they decided to stand up for themselves when somebody was bullying them at work, or it might be that a health episode changed their priorities in life. So some of the first people I had on the podcast, and I still like to bring what I call ordinary people with extraordinary stories. So I think there's loads and loads of people who can tell really resonant stories that others can learn from about these moments of clarity. And episode number 1 is a guy called Sam Horton, who's an actor, not a particularly famous actor. And he and I were working together on the idea mindset journey. And he was struggling with a particular question for 4 to 5 months, probably. And the question was, do I pursue the success route or do I pursue the happiness route? When I'm faced with the choice, do I go after success or happiness? And he texted me at 4 o'clock in the morning one day and said, I've got it. I want to pursue what makes me happy, even if it doesn't earn any money. Do you think that's the right answer? And I said a very not coaching thing, which was yes. And he said, why are you so sure? And I said, well, I'm not supposed to say that, but you've just texted me at 4 o'clock in the morning, having sat on this for a long time.
Or did you wake up in the morning and text him
back?
It
woke me up. It woke me up. And that was the moment when I thought, it's an unlock moment. That's when the name came to me. So over the last year, I have managed to attract some really, really interesting guests onto the podcast. So, for example, I had a lady called Dr. Carol Kaufman. She is a world-leading executive coach. She founded the Harvard Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School. And she said to me, I can tell you the moment that if it wasn't for this moment, we would not know each other. And she was talking with a mentor early in her career. And she said, these 3 words came into my mind. And the 3 words were, don't hold back. And she said, whenever after then I was faced with a choice, in my mind I said, don't hold back. And it took her to the bolder move. And now she chooses to work with quite challenging coaching clients, actually. She travels around the world. She's written, massive selling books. Another person that came on the podcast was Dr. Ruth Gautian, and she was ranked the #1 emergent management thinker in the world last year. And she said a mentor had said to her, do something important, not just interesting. And it shifted her thinking from doing great work to what I really want to do to make an impact in my life. There was somebody who came on my podcast who's not famous. She used to work for me, and she was working in digital retail. And her husband was diagnosed with stage 3 bowel cancer at the age of 40. And she said, and he's okay now, it's years on, he's been successfully treated, so it's a good outcome to the story. But she said in that moment, her thinking changed from, I'm always putting off the thing I really want to do because I think there'll be time, and I'll do it next year, And suddenly she went, but maybe there isn't time. And she sat down with her husband, and they had 2 young children, and they decided, even though he was about to go into chemotherapy for his bowel cancer, and even though they had 2 young children, they were going to start up an online fashion business from home, boxes throughout their home, alongside them both having jobs. And she just said, we decided that if we want to do it, we should go do it. And that business is now really successful. They've got 65,000 followers on Instagram. And it comes from that moment. The moment wasn't the moment when they decided what to do next. The moment was the moment when they said, maybe there's not always time. Therefore, I should think about, what if it's now? And I think when I talk to people who listen to these stories, so many people come back and they say, that resonates with me. That made me think differently. It doesn't mean I've got all the answers yet, but I've got permission to change. And really, that's the power of the unlock moment for me.
Well, I certainly think I've experienced something recently along those lines. Have you experienced that personally?
I have. Sometimes people experience more than one in their career. The one that I think back to and I often talk about is when I was at medical school. So I went to medical school, after A levels, like people do, and I was 27. I'd been at medical school for 7 years of an 8-year program, not really enjoying it, but not really accepting that I wasn't enjoying it. And I remember being in the corridor, walking along the corridor, exactly where I was. And the thought that came into my mind was, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. That was my unlock moment. And it just gave me permission to think I could explore a different path than continuing on into my first hospital jobs and working as a doctor. I didn't know then whether I should do or whether I would do. I didn't know what else I could possibly do. But the unlock moment was the permission to think differently. And from there, over the course of the next year, I started to explore different routes. And I realized that the things I loved about medicine were not common to medicine. There were other things that I could do that I would enjoy doing more. And over the last, what is it now, probably 20 years since I graduated from medical school, I've never looked back. And it all comes back to that moment of, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You have agency, you have control, you have choice. And if it doesn't work out, that's on you too. So I'm a great proponent of, if you're going to jump from one place to another, then jump with both feet, and don't dip your toe in and think, well, if I don't like the water very much, I'm going to step back into the thing I did before. You've got to go and commit if you're going to make these kind of changes.
And do you think, have you seen a change, I suppose, over the last few years with this resonating with people and people making these big life-changing decisions more and more? Because I think I certainly have, because we were stuck in a place for so long around COVID. And I think that's kind of made people really think about what their futures are, and it's given people time to pause, which we don't normally get. We don't normally get time to pause. We're like going from one thing to another. So have you seen that similar thing?
Hugely so, both for people in the workforce and also leaders becoming much, much more aware of the power of purpose-driven leadership, purpose-driven working. So, people like McKinsey have done research recently, after the pandemic, that says that something like 4 in 10 workers are thinking about leaving their positions in the next 3 to 6 months. Is massively more interest and in changing what people are doing from before the pandemic. But the reasons that people are wanting to change is because they don't feel that their place of work is giving them the things that they want, including more meaning and purpose in their work. There's the US organization BetterUp, which is a big coaching organization. It's the one that Prince Harry is on the board of. And they did some research recently, and it said that 9 out of 10 workers would now trade money for meaning. So they would be happy to take a lower salary in order to have work that was meaningful. And they said to them, how much lower salary? How much salary would you sacrifice if I could guarantee to you that your work would have meaning that resonated with you? And the answer was about 25%. So it's a really significant impact. And you see this particularly with Gen Z now, leaders are having to think about, how do I connect with purpose in my organization? How do I help my people to figure out what it is about the work that matters to them? And it's not that you should think that all other organizations have got this purpose and our people are inevitably going to lead. There's lots of organizations that do quite ordinary things, but they create a culture of deep purpose. And a great example of that is the WD-40 company, who make the famous releasing oil. Yeah. And the chief executive and chairman of right, there you go. The chief executive and chairman of WD-40 company for 25 years is a man called Gary Ridge, and he came on the Unlock Moment podcast. When he started leading that business 25 years ago, their employee engagement score was 55%. And when he left, it was 93%, which is higher than St. Jude's Children's Hospital in the US. And he did it by creating a culture infused with purpose, even though the product that they sell is not an exciting purpose-driven product. But he talked about, well, what difference do we make to people that we help do this? What difference do we make to people by creating a company that you love being a part of? It feels like family. They took away the word manager. If you have direct reports, then in WD-40 Company, you're called a coach. And your role is to set up the team to succeed and then get out of their way. They took away the word mistake and they replaced it with the word learning moment. If things go wrong, it's a learning moment, how to explore the learning moment. And so there were very particular things that they did to create a culture that connected with people's meaning and purpose. And it dramatically impacted their engagement, and that dramatically impacted the performance of the business. And by the time he left, the value of the business was something like 10 times what it was when he joined. It's a hugely successful company, and you would never know about that story if it wasn't for him going around the world and telling it.
Magic, isn't it? Almost, and you're imparting that to a whole team of people that then will take that into their families and lead by example. So it's almost, I love those stories. They make my hair stand on end a little bit. I get all tingly. So do you think then the unlock moment is something that you can make happen, or is it just that you're open and more, I suppose, you're inviting things in and then you're quite open-minded? Or is it something that, you can just say, right, I want to do this? And
I think it's the latter. I think for the ones that really shift your thinking and really shift your choices, the definition of the unlock moment is it is a remarkable, probably unexpected moment of clarity, but the people who have them are ready for them. So they are not in a fixed mindset. They're in a growth mindset. They're learning every day. They are open to uncertainty. They're conscious of the risks they might be prepared to take on. They're understanding of the compromises they'd be prepared to take. And there's a chapter of the book that I'm starting to write called The Unlock Moment, where I'm bringing to life the stories from the podcast. And the chapter is going to be called Alone with Others. And it's that sense that, yes, you're surrounded by people who care about you, who support you, who might be able to mentor you, who might help you develop. But ultimately, in a really positive way, it's about you. And the people that I see who have those unlock moments are the people that say, I just decided for me that this is what I wanted to do. And they take that ownership. They're not looking to somebody else to change their life for them. That's a really important part at the heart of it. So there's a huge piece around accountability and ownership.
Yeah. And responsibility, and just owning something and not relying on others to make you happy. You have to bring your own fulfillment in this world. I love chatting to you. So after the unlock moment, what happens? Is it like an epiphany? Is it some kind of moment? Or is it just like you were talking about clarity? Is it something that you physically feel, or just something in the mindset?
I think it's holistic. I think it's the whole thing. What's interesting with unlock moments is sometimes people take action straight away. Sometimes it might be months or even years before change happens. So I was talking to a guy called Dr. Richard Oshibanjo on the podcast, was published a couple of weeks ago. And he is the chief of staff and director of organizational transformation at Intel Corporation in the US. And he's a world leading coach. And he said, I knew in my mind, in my late teenage years, that I didn't really love analytical chemistry. But it was another 10 years, and I went through doing a PhD in it before I figured out that I really wanted to work on the growth of people. So his unlock moment was 10 years before he took action, but it was still the moment he looks back to and he says, that's when I knew. I didn't necessarily act at that point. So I always talk to people, and when I first talk to them, I'll say, when was your unlock moment? And they'll say, this is the time when I quit my job. And then I'll say, when did you know that that was what you wanted to do? Oh, that's different. And tell me exactly when you knew. And then they think about it, and when it's a true unlock moment because there's a pause. And then at the end of the pause, they'll say, yeah, I remember this person said this one thing to me. Micah Leibrant came on the podcast. She's one of the most famous coaches in the world. She was the public face of Gallup organization. She worked there for 14 years and set up all of their strengths coaching for 15,000 now strengths coaches around the world. And she came on the podcast 2 weeks after leaving Gallup, having been there for 14 years. And she was talking about her original decision to go to Gallup. She'd been in the broadcast media industry in the US. She was on a great path to pursue success there. And she said, My unlock moment was, it was a rainy day. I was sitting in a traffic jam at a stoplight in Nebraska in my Toyota Camry. And on the Jeep in front of me, get the specificity, on the Jeep in front of me, there was a cover on the wheel on the back of the car. And on that cover, it said, "Life is good." And I thought, mine isn't. And then she thought, but it should be. But it should be, given that I'm pursuing the career I've always wanted to do, opportunities are rising in front of me, everything's going right, but I don't feel life is good. And she'd never considered working for the Gallup organization, didn't have a background in that kind of thing. And serendipity happened, an opportunity came around for her to help out in a little bit of a project. And that was the beginning of what turned into an incredibly successful 14-year career there. But she brings it back to sitting at a stoplight in the rain in a Toyota Camry looking at the Jeep in front. And so for me, I think that there's something in tuning into that moment when you really knew, that tells you something about purpose. So thinking about the actual decisions you made and the steps you took, that's to do with the clarity you've already found. I want to get people to really hone in on that clarity. What does it mean for them? And then in organizations, people can start to talk more about what's really important to them because they start to understand it better for themselves. And the best conversations on the podcast are the ones where they haven't figured it out yet. And you can hear them in the conversation. It's a particular one I'm thinking of with a coach. And there was something like a 15-second silence in the middle of the conversation. And my podcast editor said to me, we should shorten that. You know, nobody's going to hang around 15 seconds. And I said, no, I want people to hear that it's being thought about in the moment. That's incredibly powerful. And the beauty of a podcast is there's no time limit. Nobody tells me what questions I've got to ask. You know, all of those kinds of things in a journalism interview, you can get away with new stuff in a podcast. So I think that's a really powerful thing, that you can hear the thinking going. And I'm hoping that people listening to the podcast are thinking for themselves, oh yeah, that was me. That made me think differently. That made me open to an idea that I've been close to before. That's what I want to do.
So I'm getting the idea of the content and what you can bring about in terms of change. But on a corporation level, obviously you go and you talk to companies. So tell us a little bit about your speaking work. Do you have set sort of talks that you do? Are there, do you have so many, or do you just adapt to everyone to each organisation that you talk for?
It's a great question. So I've got an eclectic background. I've worked in my corporate roles as a director of group strategy, as a customer director, chief customer officer, on executive leadership teams through transformation and change and huge organizational change in organizations. So I'm very fluent in that kind of space. So I've developed sort of three core topics, and then I always shape the narrative for the needs of the individual organization. So I meet with them in advance and understand their needs and their issues to make sure that it's something that's really going to resonate for their audience. The three topics that I've developed to talk about, one is the unlock moment. So it's about purpose-driven leadership. It's bringing to life some of the stories from the podcast, like we've just talked about, and helping that to tune that into the needs of the organization and the team, particularly in the context of trying to inspire people to a really engaged and purpose-led culture. The second theme is around creating a world-class performance culture. So lots of people talk about a high-performance culture, and they talk about how do we create high support and a high challenge culture to get to that sort of top right quadrant of high performance. What I'm layering on top of that is what I learned from traveling around the world with some of the world's best dancers and sports people, thinking about how do we become the very best in the whole world at what we do. And I call that the ultra high support, ultra high challenge model. So it's not for everybody, but it's for people who are really trying to strive for something that they think nobody else is going to be able to do. Take right now with ChatGPT and how dramatically fast industries are shifting. Organizations are going to win in this, are going to be able to pivot on a dime and shift really fast and be the first to market with new products. And to do that, they're going to have to bring everybody together, give them absolutely everything they can possibly need, and then challenge them with goals that when people first hear them, they're going to go, that's nuts. There's no way we can do that. And we saw it right at the beginning of the pandemic, that kind of mindset. The third is around the coaching culture, building the coaching culture in organizations. So how do you help your leaders to shift from a boss mindset, telling people what to do, measuring them against those targets and telling them off if they don't do it, into a coach mindset where you let go of you having all the answers and you invite your team to bring through their own ideas and take on their own accountability. And study after study has shown that's a much more effective and productive way to run a team and frees up the senior leaders to do the big thinking they need to do. Now, here's the caveat. I've been talking to people about those three topics over the last 3 to 6 months. And in every single case, people have said the one I want is the unlock moment. And in my mind, I was going, I thought that they want the one with more tangible outcomes around high performance and coach style of leadership. And they're very welcome. I'd love to do those talks. I thought that the unlock moment would feel not corporate enough for corporate organizations with a sort of specific target kind of culture. But actually, they recognize so strongly that their people are looking for purpose and meaning in what they're doing. That's the one every single one of them has wanted the unlock moment talk. So I'm figuring out how I can bring that into whatever I'm talking about.
Well, I suppose in a way, if every single person, if you're delivering a talk and you're helping every single person in that business to have that unlock moment, it's like, woo, that's powerful stuff. It's all very well to have key takeaways and to learn how to develop your skills and to, but to have that sort of epiphany in what you want to do is quite, I would say, very powerful. I have learned so much. It's been so lovely talking to you, and I'm so excited about marketing you to our clients. But before you go, I'm not going to let you go any further because I really do need to know more about your dancing background.
So
I'm a dance fan.
Well, I started dancing when I was a very cute 4-year-old. I became less cute over the years, but I started when I was very young. And I actually gave up in my 20s. I felt like I'd done everything I was going to do. And then I met my wife because she called me at my desk when I was at work and said, I'm looking for a dancing partner. And it was the beginning of a journey that was 10 years, took us around the world. We competed in 14 different countries, in Russia, in America, all across Europe, and ended up representing the UK at the World Championships. And I remember in Moscow, actually, walking out onto the competition floor, and we weren't the very best in the world, but it was the most amazing thing to walk through the doors of these ballrooms around the world and just be in close proximity to people who were just extraordinarily talented and skilled at what they did. And we learned so much about that kind of mindset. You'd be in the studio at 1 o'clock in the morning and people were training and they were saying, well, our competitors are not training right now. And we're making ourselves better and better at what we're doing. And I probably use as much from my dance experience in the dance world as I do from my corporate experience when I'm coaching senior leaders. I talked to somebody recently, actually on the podcast, who's a world leading coach, and we were talking about moving your thinking. And I said, here's the thing. If you are perfectly balanced as a dancer, you don't move because you're standing on your foot. To move, you have to knock yourself off balance, and then that causes you to fall, and then you throw out your leg on your foot and you catch your weight. That's how you move. If you're sitting going, I want to be in a different place, the first thing you've got to do is come off balance. And that's going to feel uncomfortable. And then you're going to catch your weight, and it's in the catching of the weight that you find your new balance. And she went, that's exactly what I do with my coaching clients. So there's something about the translation from the dance world that I think is very evocative for people. And I love talking about it.
And finally, your favorite dance?
Well, I'm very English. So I always liked things like the foxtrot. That's a very English style of dance. But then we did a lot of training in Italy, and they're much more passionate and fiery. So they got me much more interested in things like the tango. So we love doing our tango around the world as well.
Oh, well, do you know what? What a fascinating career, and obviously some really positive speaking topics there for anybody to engage with. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, if you'd like to book Gary to speak to your team, then simply contact myself or Steve at Great British Speakers on 01753 439 289, or you can email at bookings@greatbritishtalent.com.